The crystal goblet slipped from my trembling hands the moment his eyes locked onto mine across the grand hall, and I watched in frozen horror as the most powerful alpha in the 7 kingdoms crashed to his knees, clutching his chest as if my very existence was killing him. The entire royal court fell silent. 200 nobles turned to stare at me, the lowest Omega servant, as their future king collapsed on what should have been the happiest day of his reign. If you're already hooked and want to know what happens next, drop a comment telling me the city you're watching from so I can send you a hug. And don't forget to like and subscribe because this story gets absolutely insane. My name is Talia, and 24 hours ago I was invisible. I'd spent 3 years scrubbing floors in the shadow quarters of the Apollonian Palace, keeping my head down, my scent suppressed, my very existence a whisper that nobody noticed or cared about. That's what you do when you're an Omega born into servitude, when your parents sold you to the crown to pay their debts, when your life has no more value than the marble floors you polish until your fingers bleed. The kingdom of Apollonia had been preparing for this wedding for 6 months. Alpha King Alexandros was finally taking a mate, a strategic alliance with the neighboring kingdom of Artemisia. Princess Callisto was everything an alpha queen should be. Beautiful, powerful, from a bloodline so pure it made other nobles bow in reverence. She was elegant where I was plain, confident where I was invisible, destined for glory where I was destined for nothing. I wasn't supposed to be working the wedding at all. My usual station was the lower kitchens, the damp stone rooms where servants like me prepared food we'd never taste, cleaned dishes from banquets we'd never attend, and existed in the margins of a world that glittered just out of reach. But 3 days before the ceremony, everything changed. Head servant Erastos called me into his chambers with a look of such disgust it made my stomach turn. "You," he said, pointing one thick finger at me like I was something he'd found on the bottom of his shoe. "You're being moved to the main hall service for the royal wedding." My blood went cold. "Sir, I'm not trained for that level of service. I've never even been above the 2nd floor. Do you think I want you there?" His voice dripped with contempt. 3 of our upper servants came down with fever. "We're short-staffed, and you're the only one who fits the uniform. You'll keep your head down, your mouth shut, and your scent completely suppressed. One mistake, one single moment where you draw attention to yourself, and I'll have you sent to the mining colonies. Do you understand?" Understood. The mining colonies were a death sentence for Omegas. You went in young and came out broken if you came out at all. So I spent 3 days learning to walk with a silver tray balanced on my palm, practicing the graceful bow that kept your eyes on the floor, memorizing the names and titles of nobles I'd only ever heard about in whispered gossip. They gave me suppressants so strong they made my hands shake and my vision blur at the edges. They dressed me in the formal servant's uniform, a dove-gray dress that was finer than anything I'd ever worn but marked me as help just as clearly as if they'd branded it on my forehead. The morning of the wedding, I stood in the preparation room with 40 other servants while Erastos paced back and forth like a general preparing for war. "This is the most important day in Apollonian history," he barked. "King Alexandros is uniting 2 kingdoms through this marriage. Foreign dignitaries, neighboring alphas, the most powerful families in the realm will all be watching. You will be perfect. You will be invisible. If any of you cause even a whisper of scandal, you'll wish you'd never been born." His eyes landed on me for a moment longer than the others, and I felt the weight of that stare like a physical threat. The ceremony itself was magnificent. I'd never seen anything like it. The great hall had been transformed into something out of legend. Thousands of white roses cascaded from the vaulted ceiling, each one perfect, each one probably worth more than I'd earn in a lifetime. Crystal chandeliers refracted light into rainbow patterns across marble floors, so polished you could see your reflection. Musicians played instruments I couldn't name, filling the air with melodies that made my chest ache with a longing I didn't understand. And then there were the alphas. I'd never been in a room with so many powerful alphas before. Their combined presence was suffocating, a pressure in the air that made it hard to breathe, made every instinct in my Omega body scream at me to submit, to make myself small, to disappear. I kept my eyes down and my suppressants working overtime, focusing only on my task, Serve wine to the nobles in Section 7, refill glasses before they emptied, be invisible. I was doing well. 2 hours into the ceremony, and I hadn't made a single mistake. I'd served Duke Leonidas his 3rd glass of wine without spilling a drop. I'd navigated through crowds of elaborate gowns without stepping on a single hem. I'd kept my hand steady even when Alpha Lord Theron had looked right through me as if I was furniture. Then the moment came for King Alexandros to enter. The great doors at the end of the hall swung open, and every conversation died. Every head turned. Even the music seemed to soften, as if the very air was holding its breath. He was devastating. I'd seen King Alexandros from a distance before, of course. You couldn't live in the palace and not catch glimpses of him. But I'd never been in the same room, never felt the full weight of his presence. He stood at least 6.5 feet tall. His body built like ancient sculptures of war gods. Dark hair fell to his shoulders, framing a face that was all sharp angles and fierce beauty. He wore ceremonial armor inlaid with gold that caught the light with every step. But it was his eyes that made my breath catch. Even from across the massive hall, even with my head bowed in proper submission, I felt them. Dark as a midnight ocean, sharp as a blade, carrying the weight of absolute power. This was the Alpha of Alphas. The king who'd united 3 warring territories by the time he was 25. The warrior who'd never lost a battle. The ruler whose word was law across lands so vast it took weeks to cross them. And he was about to marry Princess Callisto, who entered from the opposite door in a gown that probably cost more than my village. She was breathtaking, moving with the grace of someone who'd been trained since birth to be a queen. Her blonde hair was woven with diamonds. Her smile was perfect, practiced, designed to enchant. They met in the center of the hall, and the high priest began the ceremony. I should have been paying attention to my section, should have been watching for empty glasses and subtle signals. But I couldn't stop watching them. Watching him. There was something wrong. King Alexandros stood rigid, his jaw tight, his hands clenched at his sides. He spoke his vows with a voice like gravel, each word sounding forced, as if it was being dragged out of him. Princess Callisto didn't seem to notice. She was radiant, her own vows flowing like poetry. I told myself I was imagining it. Told myself the suppressants were making me see things that weren't there. What did I know about Alpha Kings and royal marriages? I was nobody. Nothing. My opinions meant less than dust. The ceremony continued. Vows were exchanged. The high priest raised his hands to pronounce them bound before the gods. And that's when everything went wrong. Bring forward the ceremonial wine, the high priest announced. My section supervisor, a stern woman named Hypatia, grabbed my arm with fingers like iron. Ooh. Take the king's cup. Don't mess this up. My heart stopped. Me. But I'm not. Everyone else is positioned. Move. Now. She shoved a golden goblet into my hands, wine sloshing dangerously close to the rim. It was heavier than I expected, encrusted with gems that probably had names I'd never learn. I could feel 200 pairs of eyes on me as I walked toward the center of the hall, my legs shaking so badly I was amazed I didn't fall. Keep your head down. Don't look at him. Don't breathe too deeply. Don't let your suppressants fail. I reached the raised platform where King Alexandros and Princess Callisto stood. The high priest gestured for me to approach. I climbed the 3 steps, each one feeling like a mountain. I held out the goblet, keeping my eyes locked on the ground. Your Majesty, I whispered, the words barely audible. He didn't take it. Seconds stretched into eternity. I could feel the weight of confusion rippling through the crowd. Why wasn't he taking the cup? What was happening? Your Majesty, the high priest prompted gently. Slowly, terribly, I lifted my eyes. Just for a moment. Just to see if I should set the cup down, if I'd done something wrong, if I was about to be dragged away for some breach of protocol I didn't understand. And I met his gaze. The world stopped. I'd heard stories about true mate bonds, of course. Every Omega grew up hearing the legends. They said it was like lightning and honey, fire and comfort, A recognition so deep it bypassed every logical thought and went straight to your soul. They said you could smell your true mate even through suppressants, that their scent would call to something primal inside you. I thought they were fairy tales. Romantic nonsense told to give hope to Omegas destined for arranged marriages or lives of servitude. I was wrong. His scent hit me like a physical blow. Cedar and storms, winter frost and something wild and untamed that made every cell in my body sing with recognition. The goblet slipped from my numb fingers. I watched it fall in slow motion, wine spraying in an arc that caught the light like rubies. And King Alexandros collapsed. He went down hard, hands clutching at his chest. His face contorted in something between agony and awe. The sound he made was inhuman, a growl that shook the chandeliers and sent several Omegas in the crowd to their knees in instinctive submission. Chaos erupted. Palace guards rushed forward. Princess Callisto screamed. Nobles surged toward the platform, voices rising in alarm. The high priest stumbled backward, his ceremonial robes tangling around his feet. And I stood frozen at the center of it all, watching the most powerful alpha in 7 kingdoms writhe on the floor as if I'd poisoned him. As if my very presence was killing him. "Seize her!" someone shouted. Hands grabbed my arms. I was dragged backward off the platform, my feet barely touching the ground. The guard's grip was bruising, painful. Around me, voices screamed accusations. She poisoned him. The wine was tainted. An assassination attempt. "No," I gasped. "No, I didn't." A roar cut through the noise. King Alexandros surged to his feet with a speed that defied his size, and the sheer force of his alpha command sent everyone within 20 feet stumbling backward. Guards released my arms. Nobles fell silent mid-accusation. Even Princess Callisto went still, her face pale with shock. He was staring at me. Just at me. His eyes had changed. The dark brown had been consumed by something else, something primal and golden and absolutely terrifying. His chest heaved with breaths that sounded like they were tearing out of him. When he spoke, his voice was barely human. "Everyone out." Nobody moved. They were too shocked, too confused. "Out." The alpha command in that single word was so powerful that Omegas in the crowd whimpered. Even other alphas flinched. "Everyone leaves this hall now except her." The high priest found his voice first. "Your Majesty, the ceremony isn't complete. We need to." "The ceremony is over." King Alexandros didn't look away from me. Couldn't seem to look away. "The wedding is cancelled." Princess Callisto's gasp was audible even in the massive hall. "What? Alexandros, what are you?" "Cancelled. Finished. Done." Each word came out clipped like he was barely holding on to control. "I will explain later. I will make reparations to Artemisia. But right now, everyone needs to leave before I do something I can't take back." The threat in those words was unmistakable. This wasn't a request. It was a barely leashed alpha on the edge of losing control completely. The evacuation was messy, confused, filled with whispered speculation and backward glances. Princess Callisto had to be escorted out by her own guards, her face a mask of humiliation and rage. Nobles stumbled over each other in their rush to obey an Alpha King's direct command. Servants scattered like leaves in a storm. Within 5 minutes, the grand hall was empty except for 2 people. Me and him. The silence was deafening. I could hear my own heartbeat, rapid and terrified. Could hear his breathing, still labored, still wrong. Could feel the weight of his stare like a physical touch. "What's your name?" His voice was rough, damaged, as if speaking was taking every ounce of his control. "Talia." The name came out as a whisper. "Your Majesty, I didn't mean to. How long have you been in my palace?" 3 years, Your Majesty." Something like pain crossed his face. 3 years. You've been here for 3 years, and I never. He took a step toward me, then stopped himself as if approaching too quickly might shatter something. "Do you know what you are?" I shook my head, even though some part of me did know. Some deep, instinctive part that had recognized him the moment our eyes met. "You're my true mate." The words came out like a confession and an accusation. My fated pair. The one I thought didn't exist. The one I'd given up hoping for. Another step closer. "And you've been scrubbing floors in the lower kitchens while I prepared to marry someone else." "I'm nobody," I said automatically. "I'm just a servant. There must be some mistake." "There's no mistake." He was close now, close enough that I could see the flecks of gold in his eyes, could feel the heat radiating off him. "I can smell it. Even through whatever suppressants they have you drowning in, I can smell you. Jasmine and summer rain and something that makes my alpha howl with recognition." His hands were shaking. Actually shaking. "Do you feel it? Tell me you feel it too." I wanted to lie. Wanted to deny it, to protect myself from whatever this was going to do to my life. But I couldn't. "Yes, I feel it." The sound he made was pure relief and agony mixed together. "Good. Gods, that's good and terrible, and I don't know what to do with this." He ran a hand through his hair, the perfect wedding styling falling apart. "I just humiliated Princess Callisto in front of every noble family in 2 kingdoms. I just cancelled my own wedding after vows were exchanged. I just destroyed a political alliance that took a year to negotiate. And I can't bring myself to care because you're standing in front of me and nothing else matters. I should go." I took a step backward. "This isn't. I'm not supposed to be here. They'll send me away, they'll." "No one is sending you anywhere." The command in his voice rooted me to the spot. "You're mine. Do you understand? Any servant who tries to reassign you answers to me. Any noble who tries to have you removed deals with my alpha directly." He closed the distance between us in 2 strides, and suddenly he was there, right there. His hand coming up to cup my face with a gentleness that seemed impossible from someone so powerful. "I know this is insane. I know you're terrified. I know I just turned your entire life upside down. But I can't let you go. I won't." His thumb brushed across my cheekbone, and the touch sent electricity through my entire body. My suppressants were failing. I could feel them breaking down under the onslaught of his proximity. His scent, the mate bond that was wrapping around us like chains made of starlight. "What happens now?" I whispered. "Now." He laughed, but there was no humor in it. "Now I have to figure out how to explain to my council that I've found my true mate, and she's an Omega servant with no title, no family connections, no political value whatsoever. I have to deal with Artemisia's rage, with the humiliation of a cancelled royal wedding, with every noble family that was counting on this alliance. I have to convince my advisors that I haven't lost my mind, that this isn't some temporary insanity that will pass." His forehead dropped to rest against mine, and his next words were barely a breath. "But first, I need you to tell me you don't want this. Tell me you want to go back to your life in the kitchens. Tell me to reject the bond and honor my commitment to Callisto. Because if you don't say those words, if you give me even the smallest indication that you might want me the way I want you, there's no going back. I will burn down kingdoms to keep you. I will destroy alliances and risk wars and damn the consequences. So tell me now, Talia. Do you want me to let you go?" I should have said yes. Should have thought about the political ramifications, about Princess Callisto's humiliation, about the servants who would hate me for rising above my station. Should have considered that this kind of scandal could tear kingdoms apart. But when I looked into his eyes, when I felt the mate bond singing between us, when I breathed in his scent and felt my Omega respond with a certainty that bypassed every logical thought, I knew there was only one answer I could give. "No," I whispered. "Don't let me go." The kiss that followed was inevitable. His lips crashed into mine with a desperate hunger, and I kissed him back with equal fervor, 3 years of invisibility and suppression breaking apart under the weight of recognition. This was my mate. The knowledge was absolute, undeniable, written into every strand of DNA. When we finally broke apart, both breathing hard, he rested his forehead against mine again. "This is going to be a disaster," he said, but he was smiling. Probably, I agreed. They're going to hate you. The nobles, the servants, even some of my own guards. They'll say you used Omega manipulation, that you seduced me, that you're a social climber who trapped the king. I know. And I don't care. His arms wrapped around me, pulling me against his chest. Let them hate. Let them scheme. Let them try to tear us apart. I've fought wars, Talia. I've conquered kingdoms and crushed rebellions and survived assassination attempts. Compared to that, dealing with disapproving nobles is nothing. He pulled back just enough to look at me seriously. But I need you to understand what you're agreeing to. If we do this, if we claim this bond publicly, your life will never be simple again. You'll go from invisible servant to the most talked about Omega in 7 kingdoms overnight. Are you sure you want that? Was I? I thought about my life in the kitchens, the safety of anonymity, the simplicity of knowing exactly what each day would bring, the comfort of having no expectations, no spotlight, no pressure. Then I thought about going back to that life now that I'd met him, now that I'd felt the bond, now that I knew what it was like to be seen, really seen, by someone who looked at me like I was the answer to every question he'd never asked. I'm sure, I said. His smile was beautiful and terrible and full of promise. Then let's give the court something to talk about. What followed was the most chaotic 36 hours of my life. King Alexandros. He insisted I call him Alexandros, no titles at least when we were alone, refused to let me return to the servant quarters. Instead, he had me moved to a suite in the royal wing, 3 rooms that were larger than any space I'd ever occupied, filled with furniture that looked like museum pieces. The staff who came to attend me didn't know what to do with me. I was clearly a servant by dress and manner, but I had the king's protection and occupied a room reserved for visiting dignitaries. They brought me clothes I didn't know how to wear, offered me foods I'd only ever served to others, treated me with a confused mixture of deference and disdain. Meanwhile, the palace exploded with scandal. I heard the gossip through the walls. The servants couldn't stop talking about it. How could they? Their king had collapsed at his own wedding, cancelled the ceremony, and was now protecting a nobody Omega from the lower kitchens. The theories ranged from reasonable to insane. She must have drugged him, one maid whispered as she brought my breakfast. I heard she's secretly a princess from a fallen kingdom, another speculated. True mate bond, an older servant said with certainty. I saw the way he looked at her. That wasn't manipulation. That was recognition. The nobles were less kind. I learned through Alexandros, who visited me every evening, staying longer each time, our bond growing stronger with every shared moment, that his council was in an uproar. Messages flew between kingdoms. Princess Callisto's father was threatening war. The alliance with Artemisia was in shambles. They want me to reject you, Alexandros told me on the second night. His hand tangled in my hair as we sat together on the sofa in my sitting room. The council, the advisors, even some of my military commanders. They say a servant Omega can't be queen, that the political cost is too high, that I'm letting my alpha override my duty as king. My heart clenched. Maybe they're right. Maybe. Don't. He turned my face toward his. Don't give them power by doubting this. Yes, it's complicated. Yes, there will be consequences. But I didn't fight my way to the throne just to let other people dictate who I can love. His thumb traced my lower lip. Besides, they're wrong about you. How? You think because you've been invisible that you have no value. But I've been watching you these past 2 days. I've seen how you treat the servants who attend you, with kindness even when they're cold to you. I've noticed how you observe everything, how you understand palace politics better than nobles who've studied it their whole lives. You've survived 3 years in a place that crushes Omegas, and you did it with your spirit intact. That's not nothing, Talia. That's strength. I wanted to believe him, wanted to accept his faith in me. But doubt was a hard habit to break. On the 3rd day, everything changed again. I was in my room, attempting to read a book that had been left for me, still struggling with the idea that I now had time to read, when Alexandros burst through the door without knocking. His face was flushed. his eyes bright with something between triumph and concern. "We need to talk," he said. I set down the book. "What happened?" "I spoke with the council this morning. Told them that I wasn't going to reject our bond, that I intended to make you my queen regardless of their objections." He started pacing, too agitated to sit still. "They fought me hard. Said it would destroy the kingdom's credibility, that other nations wouldn't respect a king who married so far below his station." My stomach dropped. And then I reminded them of the prophecy. And blinked. "What prophecy?" He stopped pacing and looked at me intently. "There's an old prophecy about the Apollonian throne. It's been passed down through my family for generations, recorded by the Oracle of Delphi 300 years ago. Most people have forgotten it, dismissed it as legend. But it's written in the ancient texts, and my grandmother made me memorize it when I was young." "What does it say?" "When the warrior king finds his fated pair in the lowest places, when star meets stone and crown bows to heart, the kingdom will enter its greatest age. The bond forged not by politics but by fate will unite what was broken and bring prosperity beyond measure. But only if the king has courage to choose love over legacy." He said the words like a recitation, each syllable weighted with history. "I told the council that you appearing in my life at that exact moment, when I was about to make a political marriage instead of waiting for my true mate, might not be coincidence. I told them that maybe the gods were giving us a chance to fulfill that prophecy." I sat down heavily. "And they believed you. Some of them are considering it. The high priest especially. He's a traditional man who puts a lot of stock in prophecies and divine will." Alexandros came to kneel in front of me, taking my hands in his. "I'm not saying this won their approval, but it's given them a reason to pause, to think about what rejecting you might cost us. If there's even a chance that prophecy is real, they have to consider it." "That's a lot of pressure," I said quietly. "What if I'm not? What if I can't live up to a prophecy? Then we'll fail together." His grip tightened on my hands. "But I don't think we will. I think the gods knew what they were doing when they made us mates. I think there's a strength in you that no one has ever had the chance to see because they were too busy dismissing you as powerless." Over the next week, things began to shift. Slowly, grudgingly, but undeniably. The high priest announced he was researching the prophecy, giving it theological weight. Some of the elder council members, swayed by the possibility of divine intervention, softened their outright opposition. News spread through the palace, and servants who'd been cold to me started showing cautious respect. But the real change came from Princess Callisto. She requested a private audience with me, and despite my terror I agreed. We met in a neutral room, without guards or attendants, just two women whose lives had been irrevocably altered by fate. She was even more beautiful up close. But there was no warmth in her eyes when she looked at me. "I should hate you," she said without preamble. "I understand if you do. But I don't." She sighed, and some of the perfect princess mask cracked. "I was raised to be a political piece on a board, married off to secure alliances and strengthen kingdoms. I would have been a good queen to Alexandros. Dutiful, proper, everything expected of me. But I wouldn't have been his true mate. And denying a true mate bond." She shook her head. "That never ends well. History is full of tragic examples." "I'm sorry," I said and meant it. "I never wanted to hurt you." "I know. That's what makes this so complicated." She studied me for a long moment. "The council asked me what I thought should be done. If I thought you were using manipulation, if I believed the king was making a mistake." My breath caught. "What did you tell them?" "I told them I saw the way he looked at you. I told them I'd never seen that look directed at me, not once during our entire courtship. I told them that trying to force him into a marriage without a true bond when his fated mate was right there would be cruel." She stood up, and there was a regal dignity in the movement that I envied. "I also told them that if you prove yourself unworthy of him, I will personally ensure your downfall. Politics I can accept, fate I can respect. But if you break his heart through carelessness or incompetence, you'll discover that a spurned alpha princess is far more dangerous than a cancelled wedding. It wasn't friendship, but it was a kind of truce, and more than I'd expected. After that, the tide began to turn. Not everyone accepted me. Some nobles continued to sneer, some servants still treated me with disdain, but the outright hostility faded into grudging acknowledgement. The high priest declared the prophecy authentic and potentially active. The council voted to allow Alexandros to proceed with claiming me as his mate, though they insisted on a long courtship period to ensure stability. Alexandros ignored that last part. 3 weeks after the cancelled wedding, he performed the formal mate-claiming ceremony. It was private, witnessed only by the high priest and necessary officials, but it was binding. He marked me, I marked him, and the bond that had been singing between us since that first moment locked into place with a finality that made my soul sing. I went from Talia the servant to Talia, mate to the Alpha King, future queen of Apollonia. The transformation was terrifying and exhilarating in equal measure. I had tutors now, teaching me everything from proper etiquette to political theory. I had advisors helping me understand the complex web of noble families and their allegiances. I had handmaidens who'd once ignored me in the halls now attending to my every need. But more than that, I had Alexandros. And with him, I was discovering who I could be when I wasn't invisible, when someone saw all of me and valued what they found. "Tell me about growing up in your village," he said one night as we lay together in his chambers. Our chambers now, though I still sometimes woke up surprised to find myself in a bed that could fit 10 people. There's not much to tell. We were poor. My parents struggled with debt. When the crown offered to buy my service contract, they saw it as salvation for the rest of the family. I traced patterns on his chest, feeling his heartbeat steady under my palm. I was angry for a long time, felt betrayed. But eventually I realized they were just trying to survive. "Do you want to see them again?" Thought about it. Maybe. Someday. When I'm not so raw about everything. He pressed a kiss to my forehead. "Whenever you're ready. And Talia, you don't owe them forgiveness just because they're family. What they did hurt you. You're allowed to feel that." It was that kind of understanding, that seeing of me as a complete person with valid emotions, that made me fall deeper in love with him every day. The day of my official coronation as queen was set for 6 months after our mate claiming, giving the kingdom time to adjust and me time to prepare. But there were still obstacles, still people who doubted, still those who thought a servant could never truly be queen. The test came from an unexpected source. Duke Nicodemus, one of the most influential nobles in the kingdom, challenged my legitimacy publicly during a council meeting. "With all respect to the prophecy and to His Majesty's mate bond," he said, his voice dripping with false courtesy, "the fact remains that Lady Talia has no experience in governance, no understanding of military strategy, no diplomatic training. How can she possibly serve as queen when she doesn't know the first thing about ruling?" The room fell silent. All eyes turned to me. A month ago, I would have shrunk from that attention, would have accepted his assessment as truth. But I'd learned something in the weeks since claiming Alexandros. Being underestimated gave you power if you knew how to use it. "You're absolutely right, Duke Nicodemus," I said calmly. "I have no formal training in those areas. But I have something else. I've lived among the people you govern. I know what it's like to go hungry while the nobles feast. I know how palace policies affect the servants who keep this place running. I've seen which of your laws work and which create suffering you never see from your comfortable estates." I stood, channeling every ounce of queenly bearing I'd been learning. "You want to test my capability to rule? Then test this. I know that the servants in the West Wing have been reporting unsafe conditions for 3 years, and their complaints have been ignored. I know that farmers in the southern provinces are being taxed so heavily they're abandoning their lands. I know that the orphanages in the capital are so underfunded that children are sleeping 3 to a bed. You call this good governance?" Duke Nicodemus sputtered. "Those are minor issues. They're minor to you because they don't affect your comfort. But a kingdom is only as strong as its weakest citizens. Maybe what Apollonia needs isn't another queen trained to smile at diplomatic functions. Maybe it needs someone who actually knows what life is like for most of its people. The silence that followed was different. Considering. Alexandros was smiling like I'd just won a battle. Does anyone else wish to challenge my mate's suitability? No one did. After that meeting, something shifted in how the court saw me. I wasn't just the servant who'd lucked into a mate bond. I was someone with perspective they'd been missing, someone who could see problems they'd been blind to. I started using that perspective. I worked with Alexandros to reform labor laws, to improve conditions for servants and lower-class workers. I championed education initiatives that would give children from poor families the same opportunities as nobles. I pushed for infrastructure improvements in overlooked provinces. And slowly, painfully, the kingdom began to change. Not everyone was happy about it. There were nobles who resented a commoner queen, who saw my reforms as threats to their power. There were assassination plots that the royal guards thwarted. There were smear campaigns and vicious rumors. But there were also letters. Hundreds of them from ordinary people across the kingdom, thanking me, blessing me, calling me the people's queen. "You're doing exactly what the prophecy said," Alexandros told me one night as we reviewed the latest education proposal. "Uniting what was broken. The gap between nobles and commoners has been growing for generations. You're bridging it. I'm just trying to make things better." "I know. That's why it's working." He pulled me into his arms. "You know what the best part of finding my true mate is? It's not the bond, though that's incredible. It's not the way you fit perfectly against me, though I love that. It's that you make me a better king. You challenge me to see beyond my own privilege, to consider perspectives I've never had to think about. That's what makes you perfect for this role." I leaned into his warmth, still marveling that this was my life now. "I'm terrified most of the time," I admitted. "Good. Anyone who isn't terrified of the responsibility of ruling probably shouldn't have it." His arms tightened around me. "But you're not doing this alone. We're a team now. Your strengths balance my weaknesses. Together, we're exactly what this kingdom needs." The coronation ceremony arrived faster than I was ready for. 6 months of preparation still didn't feel like enough. The night before I couldn't sleep, my mind racing through everything that could go wrong. Alexandros found me on the balcony of our chambers, staring out at the city lights spread below like a blanket of stars. "Can't sleep. What if I mess it up? What if I say the wrong thing or trip on the ceremonial robes or... Then you'll be human." He came to stand behind me, wrapping his arms around my waist. "Talia, they don't expect perfection. Well, some of them do, but those people will never be satisfied no matter what you do. The people who matter, the ones who've been watching your work these past months, they already love you. The nobles still think I'm beneath them. Some of them always will. But you know what? Their children don't. I've watched the younger generation. They're fascinated by you. A queen who rose from nothing, who knows what real struggle looks like, who actually cares about making their lives better. You're changing the culture of this court just by existing in it." I turned in his arms to face him. "Promise me something. Anything. If I start to lose myself in this, if I start to become like the nobles who ignored the suffering I saw every day, promise you'll call me back. Remind me where I came from." His expression grew serious. "I promise. But I don't think you could forget if you tried. That empathy, that understanding of what it means to struggle, that's core to who you are. It's one of the reasons I love you." The ceremony itself was magnificent and surreal. I wore a gown that weighed more than I did, crafted from silver silk that caught the light with every movement. The crown they placed on my head was ancient, worn by queens for 3 centuries, and its weight felt like the physical manifestation of responsibility. But the moment that mattered most came after the formal crowning, during the public address. I stood on the palace balcony, looking out at thousands of gathered citizens. Nobles in their finery near the front, common folk packed into every available space beyond. All of them watching me, waiting to see what kind of queen I would be. The prepared speech sat in my pocket, written by advisors, carefully crafted to offend no one and inspire everyone. Proper. If forgettable. I left it where it was. People of Apollonia, I began, my voice amplified by the palace's ancient acoustics. 6 months ago, I was scrubbing floors in the kitchens below this very balcony. I wore rags and kept my head down and believed my life would never matter. And then fate intervened in the most dramatic way possible. I could feel the tension from the nobles behind me, their disapproval at my casual mention of my former status. I didn't care. I'm not going to pretend I'm qualified for this role by traditional standards. I wasn't raised in a palace. I don't know all the protocols. I still sometimes use the wrong fork at dinner, and I probably always will. That got a ripple of laughter from the crowd. But I know something that many rulers don't. I know what it's like to be powerless. I know what it's like to watch injustice happen and be unable to stop it. I know what it's like to be invisible in a world that only sees people who already have power. I paused, meeting eyes in the crowd. I can't promise to be a perfect queen, but I can promise this. I will never forget where I came from. I will never stop fighting for those who have no voice. And I will work every single day to make Apollonia a kingdom where a girl scrubbing floors can believe her life matters, because every life matters. Not just the noble ones. Not just the wealthy ones. Every single one. The roar that followed was deafening. Not from the nobles. Many of them looked scandalized, but from the common people packed into the square. They cheered and wept and called my name, and in that moment, I understood the true power I'd been given. Not power over them. Power to serve them. The months that followed were a whirlwind of change. I established a council that included representatives from commoner guilds, giving them a voice in governance for the first time in Apollonian history. I reformed the servant treatment laws, ensuring fair wages and reasonable working conditions. I created scholarship programs so talented children from poor families could receive education previously reserved for the wealthy. Every reform met resistance. Every change sparked debate. But Alexandros stood beside me through all of it, using his authority to push through opposition when necessary, teaching me when to compromise and when to stand firm. And slowly, undeniably, the kingdom transformed. Trade flourished as newly educated commoners brought fresh ideas and innovation. Crime rates dropped as people had more opportunities for legitimate work. The gap between nobles and commoners began to close, not through forcing the wealthy down but by lifting the poor up. 1 year after my coronation, Alexandros and I were reviewing kingdom reports when he suddenly laughed. Listen to this. The Economic Council's annual summary. Apollonia has experienced unprecedented growth and prosperity over the past year. Trade revenues are up 30%. Internal unrest is at historic lows. Citizen satisfaction surveys show approval ratings higher than any point in the past 5 decades. He looked up at me with wonder in his eyes. The prophecy, Talia. It's actually coming true. We still have so much work to do, I protested. Of course we do. Kingdoms aren't perfected in a year. But look at what we've accomplished. Look at what you've accomplished. He set down the report and pulled me into his lap, something we definitely couldn't do during official council meetings but did constantly in private. Do you remember what you told me the day we met? You said you were nobody. I believed it then. And now, I thought about the letters from citizens that arrived daily. About the children in the reformed orphanages who were learning to read. About the servants who no longer lived in fear. About the kingdom that was slowly becoming a place where everyone had value, not just those born to privilege. Now I know that nobody is truly nobody, I said quietly. Everyone matters. Everyone has something to contribute. I just needed someone to see me before I could see myself. I'll always see you. His hand came up to cup my face, thumb brushing my cheekbone in the gesture that had become our private language. My mate, my queen, my Talia. The kiss that followed was sweet and deep and full of promise. Not the desperate world-ending kiss from that first day, but something even better. The kiss of two people who'd chosen each other and would keep choosing each other through every challenge that came. When we finally broke apart, I rested my forehead against his. "Thank you." "For what?" "For collapsing at your own wedding." That startled a laugh out of him. "For being brave enough to cancel it. For seeing me when I was invisible. For believing I could be more than what I was." I pulled back to look into his eyes. "For giving me a chance to discover who I could become." "Talia, you did that yourself. I just gave you the opportunity. Everything else, all the courage and compassion and determination to make things better, that was all you." His expression grew serious. "Do you know what my council told me yesterday? They said that in terms of historical impact, you're already considered one of the most significant rulers in Apollonian history. And you've only been queen for a year." The weight of that settled over me. That's terrifying. It's also true. You're changing the world one reform at a time. And you're not done yet. He was right. Over the next 5 years, the transformation of Apollonia became a model for surrounding kingdoms. Other rulers visited to study our systems, to understand how we'd achieved such dramatic improvements in citizen welfare without destroying our economy. Princess Callisto, now Queen Callisto of Artemisia, having made a strategic marriage to a neighboring Alpha who appreciated her political mind, became an unexpected ally. She implemented similar reforms in her own kingdom, and together we formed a coalition of rulers committed to progressive change. "Who would have thought," she said during one of her diplomatic visits, sharing wine with me in the palace gardens, "that the Omega who ruined my wedding would become one of my closest political allies?" "Life has a strange sense of humor," I agreed. "It does." She studied me over her glass. "I was furious with you for months, you know. Even after I understood the mate bond, even after I made my own advantageous marriage, there was part of me that resented you for getting the fairy tale I'd been promised." "I'm sorry." "Don't be." "I'm not anymore." She set down her glass. "The marriage I have is better than what I would have had with Alexandros. My mate Alpha Theron, and I are partners in every sense. We respect each other's strengths, share power equally, and actually enjoy each other's company. That's not what I would have had in a political arrangement with your king, no matter how honorable he is. Then I'm glad things worked out for both of us." "As am I." She smiled, and this time it reached her eyes. "Besides, you've proven something important. You've shown that the old ways, where only nobility mattered, where commoners were invisible, where power was hoarded by the few, those ways were failing us. Change was necessary. You just had the courage to push for it." That conversation stayed with me. The reminder that the personal disaster of a cancelled wedding had rippled out into something larger, something that was reshaping how kingdoms thought about power and responsibility. But not everything was political triumph and social reform. The most important changes were smaller, more personal. Like the day I finally visited my family. 7 years after being sold into service, I returned to my childhood village as queen. The terror on my parents' faces when they realized who'd arrived in the royal carriage was almost comical. "Talia." My mother's voice was barely a whisper. How did you?" "It's a long story." I climbed out of the carriage, Alexandros at my side, and took in the village that had once been my entire world. It looked smaller than I remembered, shabbier, but still home in a way that made my chest ache. "Can we talk?" The conversation that followed was painful and healing in equal measure. My parents apologized through tears, explaining the desperation that had driven their decision. I told them I'd forgiven them, though it had taken years to get there. We talked about the life I'd built, the changes I was making, the person I'd become. "We're so proud of you," my father said. His weathered hands clasped in front of him like he was afraid to touch me. "So impossibly proud. Even if we had no hand in raising you to be this person. You did, though." I surprised myself by meaning it. "You taught me what hardship looked like, what it meant to struggle. If I'd grown up in comfort, I wouldn't understand the things I needed to change. So in a strange way, everything that happened brought me to where I needed to be." Before we left, I established a trust for the village. Funds for better housing, improved farming equipment, education for the children. Not as charity, but as investment in the people who'd shaped me. "You didn't have to do this," my mother said as we prepared to leave. "I know. I wanted to." I hugged her, something I hadn't done since I was a child. "You're still my family. That matters, even with everything that happened." The ride back to the palace was quiet. Alexandros held my hand, understanding I needed to process. Finally I spoke. I thought I'd feel angrier, seeing them again, remembering what they did. But instead I just felt grateful. For what? For the journey. If they hadn't sold my contract, I'd still be in that village, probably married to a local farmer, living a small life. I wouldn't have met you. Wouldn't have discovered I could be strong. Wouldn't have had the chance to help people on this scale. I leaned against his shoulder. Sometimes the worst things lead to the best outcomes. Sometimes, he agreed. Though I'd never have chosen that path for you if I'd known. I know. But we don't get to choose our paths, not really. We just get to choose what we do with where we end up. Years continued to pass. We faced challenges. An attempted coup by dissatisfied nobles, a brief conflict with a neighboring kingdom, personal struggles with the weight of responsibility. But we faced them together, the bond between us growing stronger with each trial. And then, 10 years after the cancelled wedding, everything changed again. I was pregnant. The announcement sent shockwaves through the kingdom. An heir born from a true mate bond, carrying the bloodline of an Alpha King and an Omega who'd risen from nothing. The symbolism wasn't lost on anyone. "This child will represent everything we've built," Alexandros said, his hand resting gently on my still flat stomach. "The unity of all classes. The proof that worth isn't determined by birth." "That's a lot of pressure for someone who hasn't even been born yet," I said, but I was smiling. "They'll handle it. They'll have you as a mother. They'll grow up understanding both privilege and responsibility, power and compassion. They'll be exactly what Apollonia needs." The pregnancy was difficult. My Omega biology hadn't been designed for such a powerful Alpha's child, but I survived with the help of the kingdom's best healers. And when our daughter was born, perfect and screaming and already showing signs of Alpha strength, I understood in a new way what I'd been fighting for all these years. I wanted her to grow up in a world where she could be anything, where her worth wasn't determined by gender or birth status or political connections, where she could choose her own path, make her own mistakes, become her own person. "What should we name her?" Alexandros asked, cradling our daughter with a gentleness that made my heart overflow. I thought about the journey that had brought us here, about the servant girl who'd been invisible, about the prophecy that had given us a chance, about the kingdom we'd built together. "Elpis," I said. "It means hope." "Perfect." He pressed a kiss to our daughter's forehead, then to mine. "Our hope, our future, our proof that the impossible can become real." The coronation ceremony where we presented Princess Elpis to the kingdom was different from my own. This time, the nobles cheered alongside the commoners. This time, there was no division in the crowd, only unified celebration. This time, everyone could see the promise of what we'd built. A kingdom where a child born to a servant turned queen and an Alpha King represented not scandal but possibility. Standing on that balcony, holding my daughter, with Alexandros at my side and our kingdom spread out before us, I thought about that moment 10 years ago when everything had changed. When a clumsy servant had dropped a goblet and a king had collapsed and fate had intervened in the most dramatic way possible. "Do you ever regret it?" I asked Alexandros quietly. "Canceling your wedding? Choosing me instead of the easy path?" He looked at me like I'd lost my mind. "Talia, you gave me everything. True mate bond. Partner who makes me better. A kingdom that's thriving instead of stagnating. A daughter who'll grow up understanding that real strength comes from compassion, not just power." His arm tightened around my waist. "Regret. I'd do it 1,000 times over. I'd collapse at 1,000 weddings if it meant finding you. That's very romantic, but also slightly impractical." Luckily, I only had to do it once. He grinned, then his expression grew serious. You know what the historians are calling you? The Omega who changed everything. They're writing books about your reforms, studying your methods, teaching future rulers about compassionate governance using you as the model. That's embarrassing. That's legacy. He turned me to face him fully, our daughter cradled between us. You took your pain and turned it into purpose. You took your invisibility and used it to see others who were being overlooked. You took a chance encounter and built a better world. That's not embarrassing, Talia. That's extraordinary. Looking out at the kingdom, at the citizens who no longer feared their rulers but trusted them, at the reforms that had transformed lives, at the future represented by the tiny Alpha child in my arms, I finally allowed myself to believe him. I wasn't nobody. I never had been. I just needed someone to see me before I could see myself. And once I'd been seen, once I'd understood my own worth, I'd been able to help others find theirs. The prophecy had been right. Star had met stone. Crown had bowed to heart. And the kingdom had entered its greatest age. Not through conquest or wealth, but through the simple act of recognizing that every person, no matter how invisible they seemed, had value. Tell them, Alexandros whispered, gesturing to the crowd below. I stepped forward, my voice carrying across the gathered masses. People of Apollonia, 10 years ago I stood before you as a terrified woman who didn't believe she belonged. Today I stand as your queen, holding the future of this kingdom in my arms. And I want you to know something important. The crowd quieted, listening. Every single one of you has the power to change the world. Not through grand gestures or political position, but through everyday choices to see others, to act with compassion, to believe that things can be better. I was nobody until someone saw me. And now I see you. All of you. And together, we're building something that will outlast us all. The roar that followed wasn't just sound. It was hope made audible. It was the voice of a kingdom that had learned to value all its citizens, not just the powerful ones. It was the sound of change that couldn't be undone. And as I stood there, surrounded by the love of my mate, the trust of my people, and the promise of a better future, I finally understood the full truth of what had happened that day in the Grand Hall. Yes, Alexandros had collapsed when he caught my scent. Yes, fate had intervened dramatically. Yes, everything had changed in an instant. But the real miracle wasn't the mate bond. It was what we'd chosen to do with it. The way we'd taken personal destiny and turned it into collective transformation. The way we'd refused to let obstacles define us. The way we'd believed that a servant and a king could not just find love, but could use that love to reshape an entire kingdom. That night, after the celebrations ended and we finally had peace, I found Alexandros in our chambers, watching our daughter sleep in her elaborate cradle. She's perfect, he said softly. She is. I came to stand beside him, my hand finding his. And she'll grow up in a world we made better. Thanks to you. Thanks to us. Corrected gently. You could have rejected the bond. Could have chosen political convenience over fate. But you didn't. You were brave enough to believe that love mattered more than alliance, that true partnership was worth any scandal. Without that courage, none of this happens. We made each other brave, he said, pulling me close. That's what true mates do. We stood there together, watching our daughter dream of a future we were building for her, and I marveled at the strange path that had brought us to this moment. From invisible servant to queen. From collapsing at a wedding to building a kingdom. From believing I was nobody to knowing with absolute certainty that every life had value. The prophecy had been right about one thing especially. It had taken courage to choose love over legacy. But in doing so, we hadn't abandoned legacy. We'd created a new one. Better, stronger, more enduring than any political alliance could have been. And it all started with a dropped goblet, a collapsed Alpha, and the courage to believe that fate knew what it was doing when it brought a king and a servant together in the most dramatic way possible. Sometimes the worst moments lead to the best outcomes. Sometimes scandal breeds transformation. Sometimes the most powerful thing you can do is choose love when everyone expects you to choose convenience. And sometimes, just sometimes, the invisible servant girl is exactly the queen a kingdom needs. If this story moved you, if you believe in the power of seeing others and being seen, then show me some love. Like this video, subscribe to the channel, and drop a comment telling me the city you're watching from so I can send you a virtual hug. Your support helps me bring you more stories about love, transformation, and the courage to choose your own path. Thank you for being part of this journey with me.